Hey everybody, my name is Jay Martin. This is a replay of a match that I played in. I'm in the GB player right here. And this is a really good game but played between myself and my opponent directly opposite me. This is a 2v2 game, but I'm instead just going to focus on this section of the battle. And the reason I'm doing this is Terminator watched this and asked me if I'd focus on this section of the game. So I'm going to do that now. And my opponent here is actually a very good player. He's a very, very good player. And this game is interesting and certainly a lot of teachable moments in it and worth talking about. And so I figured I'd take the opportunity to talk a little bit about playing against France and playing as GB and everything. So let's start by talking about France and some characteristics of the French armies that you're going to see. The first thing to keep in mind is that French cav is really, really good. French have the best cav in the game. The second thing is that French guard infantry are really good. There's a bunch of old guard over here. There's a militia in front and then 3 old guard behind. Or excuse me, old guard, Swiss. Well, he has a bunch of old guards somewhere. Yeah, there's another one. Second characteristic of France is that their guard infantry is very, very good. It's the best infantry in the game, and you want to keep that in mind. The third thing about France you want to think about is that their regular infantry, however, their non-guard infantry, is decidedly average. And depending upon who you're playing against them, their infantry will be below average or worse than you. And then the fourth thing to think about when you're playing with or against France is that their light infantry is kind of, it's really not that exciting. My opponent in this game doesn't have light infantry. He's using militia meat shields instead, which is, in many cases, a stronger play anyway. So those are things you want to keep in mind about France. Their guard infantry is very good, and their cav is excellent. Okay, so let's talk about playing as GB, specifically against France. Some things about GB that you want to know. The first is that British cav is not nearly as good as theirs, so you really want to avoid keeping your cav away from cav-on-cav engagements with the French. In fact, all you're going to be able to do with your cav is to disrupt their infantry, and if you're playing properly, if the game's going well for you, then all you're going to do with your cav is disrupt their infantry, okay? So, and in that instance, you really, really want heavy cav. You want the Dragoon unit, not the light Dragoon unit. It's worth the extra $40. The Dragoon unit, or the heavy cav, is much better against infantry, okay? So you want to use that unit. And you're going to want to use your cav in one of two ways. The first is you're going to want to break the weak part of their line. So they're probably going to have, my opponent has one old guard on each area of his line, but most players will bunch their old guard up on one strong flank. If they do that, then your first option is to send your cav against their weak flank to break their weak flank quickly. And the second option you have with your cav is quite literally just to throw it at their guards. Okay. The second thing about infantry is that, about Great Britain, is that their infantry is very, very good. Their regular foot is very, very good. He's going to catch me here. I don't think I get that square up in time with his shooter cav. But if you're playing as GB, yeah, he got me. If you're playing as GB, your regular foot is very good. Your regular foot is better than their Polish. It's better than their Swiss. The only thing it's not better than are their young guard, their seamen, or their old guard. Okay, so if you're playing as GB, you need to be very, very confident that you can get your guys in there and shooting at them. And I'm going to have a big problem on this flank because he's crashing me right here. However, the third thing about Britain you want to keep in mind is that their light infantry is very good. And you can see I have all my lights bunched up in an area here just ripping through this section of his line, and my lights are about to put a real beating on that old guard unit. My opponent arguably made a bit of a mistake in this game from a big picture, that he made a really devastating attack on my left that did incredibly well. And if he would have attacked with the same speed at the same time on the right, I couldn't have handled it. You see how I'm having to pull back right there, and I'm actually shifting resources. If he had made this attack simultaneously on both flanks while avoiding the center where my lights are, then he would have done much, much better. So back to Great Britain, their light infantry is very, very good, and so you want to bunch them up the hammer tactic is really, really powerful with them, especially against France. If you can get your lights in there and just chew through a part of their line, like look at this, the center of this guy's line is having serious fucking problems. It's just getting destroyed. And now that my lights are going to be able to turn and fire on his Swiss right there, these 5 lights, once that cav unit gets cleared out, I guess 2 cav units get cleared out, I'm going to put a real beating on the center of his line. Okay, so as GB, your real strength is the quality of your infantry, both your regular line infantry and your light infantry. The fourth thing to keep in mind about when you're playing as Great Britain is that you want a lot of fucking infantry. If that's your strength, you want a lot of it. In this game, I only brought 2 cav units, and I maybe should have only brought 1. I have had a lot of success with that. You know, if your strength is infantry, then bring a lot of infantry. You know what I mean? Like, Z and I played a game the other day that miraculously I won against him, and I used a similar build as GB, but I only had 1 cav. And it was kind of funny because he was played as Prussian. He brought like 10 Prussian Fusiliers, but I wound up winning that game just because I had so many men. Like, in this game, I had 11 line units, a militia, and then my 5 lights. So, you know, what is that? That's 17 infantry. That's really hard for a French player to take on the chin over and over and over. You get lucky and a couple units might come back from routing like that one did, and eventually you can just grind out a French player. The name of the game when you're playing against GB is to grind him out. And you notice that I broke him in the center right here with my lights, and he had to pull back, and then my foot held up really, really well against his guys. He has an old guard retreating and a Swiss that still didn't get engaged. So I've already routed a militia and a line unit there that caused him to have to retreat, and from this point on, this is a pretty standard typical game. You get the first initial engagement, and then after that, you know, you reform lines. And I came out of this the initial engagement of him much stronger than he did, and largely because I just had more fucking infantry than he did. And I'm going to come out of this going into phase 2 of the game with 5 light infantry ready to go. That is firepower and range advantage that he really can't handle right now. Okay. Okay, so part 1 of the commentary is, those are things to keep in mind when you're playing as GB against France. Your infantry is better than theirs in aggregate, so you want to leverage that. That's your strength. Play to your strength. It doesn't make any sense if you're playing as GB and bringing like 6 cav to fight against France. You're going to get your ass kicked. Okay, let's talk strategy a little bit. If you're the GB player playing against France, they have to be the de facto attackers. There's 2 reasons for that. The first is that their cav is a lot better than yours, which gives them impetus and a good reason to attack. And the second is that your lights are going to be better than theirs, so you can kite them to death. So, you know, if you can, you'll kite them to death. So they have to get in there and fight you. So the de facto attacker role kind of falls on the French player. So that's kind of strategic, some concepts you want to keep in mind. Now let's talk tactics. The first thing about tactically when you're playing as GB, you have 2 fundamental goals. The first goal is kill off their cav. If you can get their cav killed off and get into a scenario that I'm in right now where they don't really have any cav left and it's just infantry versus infantry, then you're going to win. And I actually have a cav unit. These are light dragoons that I brought to this game. If you have a cav unit still kicking, or excuse me, if their cav is dead going into phase 2 of the battle where we are right now, then you will win. Or it is very, very hard for you to lose if you get to a point where their cav is dead. If you kill their cav and they have to pull back and reform, then you're probably going to win. Okay? You're probably going to win. Okay, so first thing is, if you can kill their cav off, that should be a huge priority for you. The second priority for you tactically as the GB player is that, if possible, you want to avoid their guard units. Now, most people who play as France put bunch 3 old guard up on one flank and try to attack through that flank. If they do that, now this player didn't do that, he spread his old guard around, but if they do that, bunch the old guard thing up, you either want to do A, run away from them, if you can, and then crush their weak flank where they have the rest of their regular infantry. Or B, the other thing that you want to do is sometimes when you're playing against France and they have their old guard all bunched, you really just kind of have to take it on the chin and recognize that those old guard are going to chew through your first line, and you just have to keep throwing infantry at them. If I'm playing against France, I will happily send 6 foot units up against 3 old guard, because I know that my first batch of foot, my first 3 or 4 foot, are going to get routed. They are going to die. But my second batch, are gonna hit him really fucking hard. My second batch are gonna hit him, and there's no real solution. Like, see, this is a really good example. This old guard is down to 42. I am completely happy with that. And I am completely, every volley I can get up against that old guard, every single one of those soldiers that I can kill is really, really, really important. So if you're playing against France, you either want to avoid their guard units, or B, you just have to keep throwing people at them. And the nice thing about playing old guard is that if you keep your general alive, because of the old guard fear ability, your units are going to rout at relatively high numbers, but once your units wander away, you're going to notice that a lot of them come back from routing. Once that fear wears off, you notice that I have a militia unit that came back from routing there. I think I had another 2 units that came back from routing over here. They initially routed because of that fear ability from the old guard. Okay, so don't freak out. You have to accept the fact that you're just going to have to chuck a lot of infantry at them. You know, that is a reality. But once you get that old guard off the field, they don't have the fear ability anymore, and your infantry is better than theirs, so you are able to fight them. Okay, and this game really kind of, I think, plays as, this is a really great game. I played against a very good player, but you know, this is something where, you know, I know those kind of little tricks how to play against France. And if you load up a 1v1 on Grassy against somebody who brings France, what you want to bring is a build with a lot of infantry, and preferably good light infantry if you can leverage that against them. And you want to bring fairly little cav. You want to prioritize killing their cav and doing as much damage to their old guard and getting that old guard off the field as quickly as possible. You know, I think that if I'm playing like as Prussia against France, which is a very classic matchup, I think GB is better against France than Prussia is, but a lot of people really like the Prussian Lights. If you're playing as Prussia against France, your priority is get those old guard off the field. You know, if you can take the hits from their volts for a while, there's no need necessarily to run your lights in just to exchange fire with their volts. Light on light fire when you're playing against France is a really stupid proposition. Get your light after shooting at their old guard. That's the best thing you can do. And in this game, that's what happened. You know, did 2 things. First of all, weathered the initial assault of their cav, got their cav dead, and I managed to survive the early part of the game with my light infantry intact, which gave me a huge leverage going into the second half of the game. In the beginning of the second half of the game, I prioritized killing their old guard off, and once that old guard was off, I'm able to come out of this. And this turns out to be a pretty decisive win for me. 1, 2, 3, 4, what do I got, about 12 units left? That's a really decisive win, especially against a player of high caliber. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes I play against, you know, randoms. 1v1 on Grassy, I don't come out with this many units. So it's a really effective, those are a series of really effective tactics to use against France if you're playing as GB. And yeah, he had an old guard come back, still at 70, and we're going to have to get in there and kill them. And I think I'm just going in for yeah, I think he's melee charging me is what's happening, but I get to run some guys over to shoot at him. And that'll be the end of the game. So I hope that's interesting. But those are some pretty solid ideas about how to play against France and how to use GB. Again, you know, the things I'm talking about on how to use GB are kind of true no matter who your opponent is or no matter what your opponent is. It's just incredibly effective against France. Like if you're playing against Spain or Russia or whatever, emphasize your infantry as Great Britain. That's your strength. Play to it. If you're going to bring cav, I really recommend you bring the heavy dragoon cav, and that's it. Keep your general alive. Helps a lot. And that's it. I'm Jay Martin. Thanks for watching. Check out twreplays.com.